Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really embarking on quite an ambitious journey.
Definitely.
We want to unearth two, powerful, but profoundly different answers to a question that feels timeless, really.
Which is?
What happens when the established world, the one we live in, just isn't built for you, or maybe feels fundamentally misaligned?
Right. How do societies or even just individuals respond to that feeling, that disconnect?
Exactly. And this deep dive is going to be a bit different. We're exploring two vastly divergent, yet maybe surprisingly resonant approaches.
Okay.
We're looking at societal structure, revolution, community, big themes. On one side, we have a historical overview, communism, Karl Marx to Joseph Stalin.
Right. The grand state-driven ideology, its aims, its evolution, and its consequences.
And then on the completely other hand, we've got this deeply personal, really philosophical text.
The We Are Us Manifesto by Wayne Sky Anderson.
Yes, which offers this, radical vision of grassroots community building, resistance. It really flips the script on power.
A very different scale and approach.
Totally different. So our mission today, what we want to achieve, is to extract the core insights from both.
Understand what they were proposing, the challenges, what they reveal about, that human desire for justice, connection, liberation.
Exactly. And hopefully by the end, you'll have a swift, clear, but still nuanced grasp of these, let's face it, pretty complex historical and philosophical ideas.
Yeah, maybe finding some unexpected parallels or just stark contrasts.
Hopefully. So let's get started with this deep dive.
Okay.
Right. Let's begin by trying to unpack this huge concept, communism. What was it initially conceived as before all the history that followed?
Good place to start. Because the reality got complicated fast.
Extremely. Our source from UNC Center for European Studies gives a pretty clear foundational definition. At its core, communism, as Marx saw it anyway, was this radical attempt to solve inequality.
By restructuring who controls resources, right? Not just tweaking things, but a fundamental overhaul.
Precisely. It wasn't just economic tinkering. It was reimagining society. The source defines it as a political ideology and a type of government where the state owns the major resources.
And by major resources, we mean pretty much everything important.
Yeah. Property, the means of production, so factories, farms, tools, even education, agriculture, transportation, all state-owned.
And the driving idea behind that?
The ambition was for a society where everyone shares the benefits of labor equally. The goal was to eliminate the class system entirely.
Get rid of rich and poor through income redistribution, a total leveling.
A vision of absolute equality, which sounds, potentially utopian, but as history shows.
Carries massive risks, yeah. But where did this idea even come from? Who kicked it off?
Well, that leads us to the intellectual origins.
Karl Marx,
Yeah.
the father of communism, a German philosopher, economist, a major thinker of his time.
Right. And he wasn't alone. He co-authored the seminal work, the Communist Manifesto, with Friedrich Engels in 1848.
And the Manifesto. It wasn't just a call to arms, was it? It was more analytical.
Exactly. It's this deep, though obviously very critical, analysis of history itself. Its main theme, its central argument, is about class struggle.
Marx and Engels argue that class struggle was the engine of all history in every society, and that capitalism, specifically, created this dangerous instability.
Because of its system of exploitation, right? The owners versus the workers.
Precisely. They saw history as this progression of class warfare, building towards what they saw as the inevitable overthrow of the capitalists, the bourgeoisie, by the exploited workers, the proletariat.
But it's important to remember, you mentioned it was analytical. Did it actually say how to set up a communist state?
That's a crucial point. While the manifesto did outline some goals, like abolishing private property, creating a classless society, it was mostly focused on why communism was necessary, based on historical events.
So not a practical handbook?
Not really, no. It didn't provide a concrete blueprint, no step-by-step instructions for setting up a government, and that lack of detail left a lot open to interpretation later on.
Which is absolutely key, isn't it? Because Marx himself died long before any government actually tried to implement his ideas.
That's right, he never saw it in practice.
But his writings, combined with the real palpable discontent among workers across Europe, they had this immediate, massive impact.
Oh, absolutely. They ignited something, inspired revolutionary industrial workers everywhere, leading to this powerful international labor movement.
It wasn't just dusty philosophy. It spoke directly to their lives, their struggle.
It resonated deeply. So even without that how-to guide, the theory connected powerfully with the boiling anger of the time. It sparked a global conversation.
To really get why Marx's ideas hit so hard, we need to picture that time, right? The historical backdrop.
Yeah, the mid-19th century. Industrial Revolution in full swing.
He saw communism not just as an idea, but as this global movement, something that would spark or maybe even accelerate what he saw as inevitable working-class revolutions everywhere capitalism existed.
He even thought they were starting to bubble up already, even before the Manifesto was widely read. He saw the early signs.
And the conditions. They were right for it, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely grim. You have this new urban working class pouring into cities across Europe, and the Industrial Revolution, for all its progress, created these pockets of just utter misery.
Dehumanizing conditions, really.
Terrible squalor. People working insane hours, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, in dangerous factories, unregulated mines, for wages that barely kept them alive.
And living conditions to match.
Cramped, unsanitary tenements, disease everywhere, whole families crammed into single rooms. And then you contrast that
with the luxury of the owners. The bourgeoisie, as Marx called them.
Exactly. The factory owners, the landowners, living in opulent comfort. Imagine seeing that vast gulf every single day. The injustice must have felt overwhelming.
So it's no wonder that communism, promising equality and end to class, shared benefits.
It sounded incredibly appealing to these revolutionaries, these disenfranchised workers. Even when those first big revolutions in 1848 in France, Germany, elsewhere, ultimately failed.
They collapsed, right? Lack of leadership, infighting.
Yeah, they fizzled out. But the ideas didn't die. Those lower-class workers, the peasants, they held on to that legacy, that communist ideology for decades.
Waiting for their moment.
Waiting for the conditions to get so bad that revolution felt not just possible, but necessary, absolutely inevitable.
And that moment, well, history shows it arrived with a bang, didn't it, in Russia?
Russia becomes the focal point. The place where these theories take root in a very specific and ultimately brutal way.
Russia had its own deep-seated problems.
Yeah.
Centuries of absolute monarchy under the czars.
And widespread, crushing poverty for the vast majority of peasants, the growing number of factory workers, a deeply unequal society already.
And then came World War I.
Catastrophic.
Yeah.
Absolutely catastrophic for Russia. The war led to nationwide famine, people starving.
And unimaginable loss of life on the front lines. The country wasn't just tense. It was on the verge of complete collapse.
The fuse was lit, definitely.
Yeah.
And the explosion came throughout 1917, a tumultuous year.
It started spontaneously, didn't it? Not some grand coordinated plan initially.
Right. Protests by factory workers, women demanding bread in Petrograd, St. Petersburg now. Just desperate people.
And the Tsar's reaction? Predictable, I suppose?
He ordered the army to suppress the unrest. But here's the turning point. The army refused.
They wouldn't fire on the people.
Many soldiers, fed up with the war, sympathetic, they actually defected, joined the protests. The military lost control completely.
And with no army loyalty, no popular support.
The Tsar had to abdicate. Centuries of Romanov rule just gone. The imperial parliament tried to step in, formed a provisional government.
Trying to establish some kind of order, maybe the democracy?
An attempt, yeah. But it was fragile. The power vacuum, the sheer level of discontent, it set the stage for something much more radical.
Enter Vladimir Lenin.
And Leon Trotsky. Returning from exile, seeing this chaos as their opportunity.
The moment to enact that Marxist revolution they'd dreamed of.
They formed the Bolshevik Party, a communist party, and crucially, they tapped into the public mood with a very strong anti-war stance.
Which must have been incredibly popular. People were desperate for the war to end.
Absolutely. Lenin expertly used that anti-war feeling. He promised immediate peace. That combined with his other promise.
Bread, land, and peace.
Yes. To a population suffering from famine, wanting land reform, desperate for peace. It was an irresistible message.
And he used that popularity to seize power.
In the October Revolution, 1917, overthrew the provisional government, took control, and pulled Russia out of the war almost immediately, delivered on that key promise.
But taking power is one thing. Holding it and building a communist state is another. Was it a smooth transition? Democratic?
Far from it. That's a critical misunderstanding sometimes. Despite their popularity in overthrowing the government, when actual elections were held later in 1917,
the Bolsheviks didn't win outright.
They only got about 25% of the vote. And Lenin's response? He basically ignored the results.
Just overturned them.
Used military force, the Red Guard, to prevent the elected Democratic Assembly from even meeting. That was really the start of the authoritarian single-party state.
So, democracy wasn't the priority. Centralized control was.
Immediately, he launched sweeping state programs. the Galero Plan for electrification, a big symbol of modernization.
And some social reforms, too.
Yes, national free healthcare, free public education. Pretty revolutionary ideas for the time, aimed at uplifting the masses.
But there was a darker side emerging simultaneously.
Absolutely. The Chicaka, the secret police, established explicitly to defend the revolution, which meant censoring dissent, crushing opposition, dealing with anti-Bolsheviks.
A tool of repression from the start.
And then, after 2 assassination attempts on Lenin in 1918, things escalated dramatically.
Yeah.
A figure named Joseph Stalin suggested a more systematic approach.
To terror.
Mass terror against counter-revolutionaries.
Yeah.
Lenin, apparently shaken by the attempts, authorized it. The Red Terror began.
Which meant?
Executions, targeting former government officials, the Tsar's people, even the royal family themselves, state-sanctioned violence on a large scale.
And this led directly into the Civil War.
Yes, a brutal conflict.
Ah,
The
yeah.
Bolsheviks, the Reds, versus the White Guard.
Which wasn't a unified force, right? More like anyone who opposed the Bolsheviks.
Exactly. A loose coalition, Tsarists, liberals, nationalists, even some anti-communist socialists, all united only by their opposition to Lenin.
And both sides committed atrocity.
Horrific terror tactics, mass executions, looting, POW labor camps, early versions of the gulags. The country was torn apart. Agriculture collapsed, the economy shattered, more famine, just chaos and cruelty.
So after the Reds finally won the Civil War around 1921, what did Lenin do? The country must have been ruined.
Facing total economic collapse, peasant revolts, Lenin made a surprisingly pragmatic move, something that actually contradicted Marxist ideology.
What was that?
The New Economic Policy, or NEP. He allowed some private businesses, a limited market economy, to function again.
A step back from pure communism.
The tactical retreat, yeah. A recognition that the state couldn't run everything immediately after such devastation. He also annexed Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan during this period.
Why?
Ostensibly for protection, to create buffer zones against perceived enemies, but also expanding Soviet influence. But Lenin himself was fading. He had strokes, right?
Yes, a series of them. He died in January 1924, and his death unleashed this fierce power struggle within the Politburo, the party leadership.
Everyone vying to be his successor, to control the future of the Soviet Union.
And one figure rose above the rest.
Joseph Stalin, born Iosif Vissarionovich Djigashvili. He'd already shown his ruthlessness during the Red Terror and Civil War.
He was the one who suggested the systematic terror to Lenin, wasn't he?
That's right. Showed his leanings early on, and his general secretary under Lenin, a role that seemed administrative.
He used it to build his power base.
Shrewdly, yes. Amassed huge influence. He also led brutal military actions, like the 1921 invasion of his native Georgia, crushing opposition with an iron fist.
But Lenin became wary of him.
Critically important point, yes. Towards the end, Lenin dictated notes, his testament, explicitly warning about Stalin.
What did it say?
It warned of Stalin's excessive ambition, his obsession with power, his rudeness. Lenin actually advised removing him from the general secretary post, saw him as dangerous.
But Stalin managed to suppress it.
After Lenin died, Stalin, the master political operator, allied with other Politburo members, kept the testament quiet and consolidated his own power. Outmaneuvered everyone despite Lenin's warning.
And once he had that power,
There was no looking back. He systematically eliminated his rivals within the party over the next few years. Isolation, expulsion, execution.
until he was the unchallenged leader.
By the late 1920s, definitely. Supreme leader until his death in 1953. An iron grip. And one of his first major acts was to scrap Lenin's NEP.
Back to pure state control.
Yes. Highly centralized command economy. The famous 5-year plans were launched to rapidly industrialize the country.
An agrarian society transformed into an industrial powerhouse almost overnight.
That was the ambition. Catch up with the West, surpass them, whatever the cost.
And the cost was immense.
Catastrophic.
Yeah.
This forced rapid shift from agriculture to heavy industry, the collectivization of farms, it completely shattered the food supply chain.
Leading to
A massive famine, especially devastating in Ukraine. The Holodomor from 1932 to 1933. Millions died. Many historians consider it a man-made famine, a direct result of Stalin's policies.
And alongside the economic upheaval, the political repression intensified.
Hugely. Anyone deemed an enemy real or imagined faced imprisonment in the gulags, the labor camps, or deportation to Siberia.
The gulags became synonymous with Soviet repression.
Sites of unbelievable suffering and death. And then came the Great Purge, starting around 1934.
This was targeting enemies within the party, too.
Yes, even loyal communists who disagreed with Stalin. Show trials, mass arrests, summary executions. It's estimated around 1 million people were executed just between 1934 and 1940. Wiped out any potential dissent.
Just horrifying. A terrifying illustration of ideology twisted into tyranny. Then came World War II.
Right. Stalin initially signed that non-aggression pact with Hitler in 1939. A cynical move.
Which Hitler broke in 1941.
Launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. The Eastern Front became this brutal, bloody theater of war. This forced the Soviets to join the Allies against the Nazis.
And the Soviet Union played a huge role in defeating Germany.
Immense. They absorbed so much of the Nazi war machine, suffered staggering casualties, but ultimately pushed back, and the Red Army captured Berlin in May 1945. A decisive moment.
But the alliance didn't last.
Not at all. The deep ideological tensions between the U.S. and the USSR, capitalism versus communism as practiced by Stalin, they boiled over almost immediately after the war.
Leading directly to the Cold War.
Exactly. Not a hot war, but this decades-long global standoff. A struggle for influence, ideological supremacy, dividing the world, keeping everyone on edge for nearly half a century.
Okay, this is where things take a really sharp turn. A fascinating pivot.
Right, shifting gears completely.
Because if that first part was about this grand, top-down, state-driven system and its, frankly, often brutal history.
With huge ambition, but also immense human cost.
Exactly. This next source offers something totally different, a response to systemic pressure that's deeply personal, philosophical, almost internal.
You're talking about the weareus Manifesto by Wayne Sky Anderson.
That's the one. It's not history. It's more like a blueprint for a different way of being, a different kind of rupture.
And it starts with a pretty stark declaration, doesn't it? No punches pulled?
None at all. The reality check. This world was never meant for us. It just lays it out there.
It critiques a world that, it says, worships sameness, demands obedience.
Trades freedom for paychecks in jobs that feel like cages. Rewards silence, punishes deviation.
And crucially, pathologizes difference. Brands people with diagnoses, pretends those labels are destiny, rather than seeing the whole person.
It's a really powerful indictment of how society can make people feel fundamentally wrong just for being who they are.
Yeah, a visceral critique.
And it emphasizes the personal costs, making it feel very real for anyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong.
It mentions years choking on our own tongues. That feeling of having to silence yourself.
Friendships that vanished the moment we said no, highlighting how fragile connections can be if they're based on just going along.
Nights unraveling under fluorescent expectations. That quiet despair of trying to fit a mold that just isn't you.
It really captures that deep pain, doesn't it? And then comes this really sharp, almost brutal insight.
Which one?
This world is not broken. It's working exactly as designed to erase us.
Wow. Okay, so it's not a flaw in the system, but the system's purpose.
That's the argument. It's designed not to nourish difference, but to manage it, market it, or just erase it.
Systems that talk about scarcity, but hoard abundance. Brand healing as a luxury. Privatize care, monetize grief.
Use algorithms to erase the unprofitable. It's a really scathing look at the foundations of modern society, not just the surface issues.
It frames it as the lived reality for many. The soul-draining job, the social media feed defining your worth, the laws policing identity and survival.
And it argues this structure exists because invisibility is profitable, standardization is efficient. A choice was made, prioritizing power over presence.
It wasn't an accident, it was designed that way.
But then the manifesto makes this incredibly defiant turn. It refuses that reality.
How so?
It says, we are not here to fix it. We are not here to beg for a place in it. We are here to build what it never dared imagine.
So not reform, but creation. Building something entirely new.
Exactly. It calls itself a movement for the ones it forgot, a rupture, a deliberate break, a refusal shaped into community.
Where saying no to the old system becomes the foundation for saying yes to something different.
A mutiny with open arms, inviting people in rather than fighting against. Ultimately, it's about creating something worth surviving for, a sanctuary.
So if that's the vision, who is this we? Who belongs in this new creation?
The manifesto has this powerful declaration of self. It states very clearly, we are not a mistake, we are not a phase, we are not symptoms, glitches, burdens, or punchlines.
A reclamation of worth, defining themselves against a world that tries to diminish them.
Precisely. And it describes us not as broken, but as those who never fit.
Why? Not because they're flawed, but because they were born too wide for their boxes, too wild for their timelines, too alive for their dead language.
It speaks to those who feel everything, the highly sensitive, the empaths, those who see beneath the surface, the perceptive ones.
Those who carry what others refuse to name.
Yeah.
The hypersensitive, the hyper-aware. Those the world often calls too much.
Right. Laugh too loud, cry too easily, love too deeply. And the manifesto reframes that beautifully.
Oh.
It asks, too much for what? Too much for them, never too much for each other. Redefining worth within their own community.
That's powerful. And the definition of who belongs is incredibly broad, isn't it?
Amazingly inclusive. It's explicitly all who were never meant to belong within the current system.
Outliers, outsiders, overlooked, misdiagnosed, misgendered, misunderstood.
If you don't fit the shape society demands, the manifesto says, you are one of us. No requirement, no permission needed.
Radical openness, very different from systems demanding conformity, a real invitation to anyone feeling alienated.
And it's crucial to note, it's not just for the obviously different. It makes a point of including quieter forms of nonconformity.
Like who?
The quiet defiance of the logical, those resisting through thought, those who pass to survive but feel internally rebellious.
People whose neurodivergence might be hidden, maybe in spreadsheets or stims.
Those who resist by asking better questions, challenging norms subtly, or those whose bodies mark them as other before they even speak.
Even those who say no internally without raising their voice.
The message is clear. If your life is a refusal to disappear, if your being contradicts the world attempts to flatten you, you are us, it embraces all forms.
And within this broad we, it makes a key distinction, doesn't it, between the community and the kin.
Yes, that's vital. The community is the base layer. Those who found each other in the static and chose freely to stand together.
And joining is simple.
Disarmingly simple. Choose it. Respect it. Honor the values it's built on. That's all. No tests, no codes, no performance required.
And what does this community offer?
Safety, autonomy, and space to unfold. In return, members offer presence, care, and commitment to each other's becoming.
It's described as a constellation, not a chain of command. Equal, different, bound by trust, decentralized, egalitarian.
Exactly. Built on respect, not hierarchy. And then there are the kin.
Who go deeper, right, not higher up, but deeper in commitment.
Yes. Kinship isn't a title. It's chosen through action. Kin take on risk. They choose to respond, not just within the community, but to all who are part of us, even those they don't know.
An outward-looking responsibility. Standing at the edge, holding the threshold.
Meaning they face the difficult realities, protect the boundaries, and their core declaration can say, if I see harm, I will not look away.
They refuse to abandon anyone suffering. It's not about status, it's devotion lived in motion.
Showing up again and again, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Radical commitment to mutual aid and protection.
It really reinforces that core message you mentioned earlier.
You were not too much. You were never not enough. You were just too alive for a world afraid of life.
And why the urgency? Why articulate all this now?
The manifesto is clear. Silence costs too much. Invisibility isn't safety. Survival isn't guaranteed. The world will keep naming us wrong if we don't name ourselves.
So it's more than resistance.
It's memory, reclaiming shared experience, it's protection, creating a shield, and it's promise, a commitment to a different future. Becoming, not asking permission.
Okay, so how does this community actually work? What are the operating principles?
It starts with that absolute core tenet, we do not look away.
That's the spine, the engine, the bridge. The non-negotiable foundation, accountability, presence.
Right. And the reflex of kin is how that principle becomes practice.
An immediate intuitive response when someone is wounded, silenced, erased.
Not because they're similar or earned it, but just because their suffering fractures the world we're trying to survive.
Kinship as consequence, as a binding oath, as sacred. And responding resists commodification.
Exactly. It's not transactional. It collapses systems that profit from separation by showing connection and aid are freely given. It's defense, not destruction, a chosen responsibility.
To see each other without transaction is to collapse the systems that profit from our separation.
That's a powerful line.
Isn't it? And the way they respond is fascinating because it's so flexible.
There is no script because we are not standard people.
It requires intuition, deep listening. It lives in choices, tension, vulnerability, the pause before acting, the act itself, and the trust it builds.
The examples given are really helpful. Loud care, quiet care, fierce care, soft care.
Interrupting a bad joke, loud. Texting, I'm outside without pressure, quiet. Stepping between someone and harm, fierce. Saying, you don't owe me an explanation, soft.
It shows how care adapts to the person in the moment. driven by empathy.
And the why behind it all is tied directly to the community's purpose.
Because the community exists to liberate us, and kin are the way we do it. They can't rely on the systems that erase them.
They had to build this from scratch, with broken tools and burning hearts, because we had to, remembering when no one came for them.
Their purpose isn't fixing or rescuing or saving.
But simply saying, I see you, and I will not let this pass unseen. That's the foundation, the root of everything else.
And guiding all this action are the 10 core commitments.
Right. Not rules, but the living pulse, practices we become, compasses to carry. They define the whole ethos.
Let's touch on a few key ones. The first seems foundational. We respond.
Yeah, refusing to let harm pass unchallenged. Acting, even when uncomfortable, directly counters that tendency to look away.
Then, we do not demand sameness. Crucial. Difference isn't just tolerated, it's the foundation. Belonging doesn't require conformity.
A powerful affirmation of individuality within the group, and we honor autonomy.
No one's a project to fix. Consent is sacred, not optional. Care is offered, never imposed. Respecting agency.
Then there's we hold softness as strength, rejecting that idea that vulnerability is weakness. Tenderness breaks chains. Feeling is power.
I also like, we protect each other's right to rest. Rest isn't earned, it's a right. Building systems to support people when they're exhausted, recognizing rest as resistance.
And finally, maybe the most resonant, we do not abandon the outliers.
When someone drifts or is cast out, they don't erase them. They reach out, ask, remember, we were once the outliers too, fostering deep compassion.
These commitments are how the we stops being defined by damage and starts being shaped by care.
Building that world they swore was impossible through daily practice, an ongoing act of creation.
And to make it even more practical, there are the practices of kin, the breath of the community.
Not rigid laws, but how they carry each other, living actions.
Like show up imperfectly, just be there as you are, flaws and all, stay committed.
Ask before acting. Consent first, always, even in urgency. Respect boundaries.
Offer, don't impose. Support is an offer, not a takeover. Love without denying agency.
Disrupt harm without delay. Name a justice, call it out, even when it's hard.
Make repair practice, not performance. Go beyond apologies to actively rebuild trust over time.
Offer without expectation. Kinship isn't transactional. Give because you can. Receive because you need.
It's okay to need. Countering the shame around dependency. Need is human.
Call in the quiet ones. Notice silence. Make room for overlooked voices gently.
Tend to the unseen. Uplift invisible labor, grief, emotional load. Redistribute it.
And choose presence over performance. Intimacy over optics. Depth over display. Real connection.
It's a really detailed picture of how they try to live these values. And within that, there's even a practical framework for responding to immediate harm.
Ah, the 3 layers of response, like an ethical first aid kit.
Exactly. First is Sagna 1, preserve life, the emergency layer. Focus on immediate physical danger.
Is someone safe? Can I help safely, or do I need to call for backup, medical, legal, etc.?
And crucially, you are not required to endanger yourself, but you are called to respond. Even presence is intervention. Just being there matters.
Okay, layer 2.
Okay, stabilize the moment, the grounding layer. Once physical safety is handled, focus on the emotional shock.
Immediate needs: quiet, warmth, shelter, a basic plan, offering comfort, logistics, resources.
The core idea. No one heals in chaos. Sometimes the most radical thing is to make a phone call, brew a cup of tea, or simply stay, creating a safe space for recovery.
And the 3rd layer.
Third 3, preserve dignity, the restoration layer. This is vital and often missed. Avoid making it about yourself. Help the person feel seen, not pitied. Support their agency and wholeness.
Asking yourself, am I projecting or truly listening?
And recognizing some wounds don't bleed. They hide in silence, in shame. Dignity is a form of healing, too. A truly holistic, trauma-informed approach.
Okay, so let's try and connect these threads. We've got these 2 vastly different responses to systems perceived as harmful.
Communism and the weareus Manifesto.
But if we zoom out, they both start from a similar place, don't they? Both identify deep problems with the existing structures. A world that doesn't serve everyone, or actively harms some.
Right. Communism critiques capitalism's class system, its instability, its exploitation, prioritizing profit over people.
And the Manifesto critiques a world that erases difference, pathologizes people, monetizes basic needs like care and grief. A world designed to diminish certain individuals.
So both see this fundamental misalignment between the system and human needs like dignity, belonging, well-being, a shared diagnosis in a way.
Which leads both to talk about rupture or revolution, but in very different ways.
Marx saw it as this global, often violent working-class uprising, overthrowing capitalism, seizing the state, creating a classless society through force if necessary.
A dramatic external upheaval, taking power.
Whereas the Manifesto's rupture isn't about seizing the state, it's a refusal shaped into community, creation as revolution.
Building something new within the old, focused on care and internal transformation.
Exactly. Disengaging from the harmful system, creating an alternative rather than taking over or trying to fix the original from within.
And that contrast really highlights the difference between centralized power and decentralized care.
Communism, certainly as implemented in Russia under Lenin and especially Stalin, became intensely centralized.
The state controlled everything. Resources, ideology, enforced by the party, secret police, purges, individual liberty often sacrificed for the state's goals, top-down control.
While the Manifesto's vision is entirely bottom-up,
Yeah.
built by the marginalized for the marginalized.
Emphasizing presence, care, kinship as revolution, explicitly refusing to rely on the systems that erase them.
It's all about personal responsibility, collective action, mutual aid completely outside any state structure, radical self-organization born from necessity.
And a key difference in how they view the collective.
In Soviet communism, the collective, the state, the party became paramount, often at the expense of the individual. Think of the famines, the purges.
The individual was often seen as secondary to the state's needs or the revolution's progress.
But in We Are Us, the collective, the community, the kin is formed specifically to preserve individual autonomy and difference.
Difference is not a flaw. It is the foundation. The group exists to protect and nurture individuality, not suppress it. A collective celebrating difference.
Which brings us to that stark contrast in methods and the resulting human cost.
Communism, in practice, relied heavily on force. Military power, censorship, mass executions.
The Red Terror, the Great Purge, chilling examples of state violence used to consolidate power and eliminate opposition. Millions died. The ends were seen to justify truly horrific means.
Whereas the Manifesto's methods are care as defiance, truth as structure, building altars out of eye contact.
The reflex of kin responds to harm through connection and protection, not destroying opponents. This is defense, it says.
The human cost. There is more about the emotional labor, the vulnerability, the struggle to stay present and connected, rather than state violence. It values individual dignity above all.
So the outcomes look vastly different, too. Both might aim for a better world, in theory.
But communism's real-world implementation led to immense suffering, repression, loss of life, despite the initial ideals of equality.
While the Manifesto focuses on creating safety, dignity, belonging for the marginalized now, through consent, rest, non-abandonment, empathy.
It's not trying to remake the whole world by force, but to build a viable, caring alternative within it. A haven.
And so as we bring this deep dive towards its close, it really highlights this huge spectrum of human responses to injustice, doesn't it?
When systems fail us, we try to build something else. It's a powerful impulse.
Absolutely. Both the story of communism, its grand scale, its tragic turns, and the philosophy of We Are Us, its intimate focus on kinship and care.
They're both reminders of that ongoing human struggle for more equitable, more fulfilling ways to live together. One tried through massive political and economic overhaul at terrible cost.
The other proposes this radical reimagining of human connection, mutual aid built on care and refusal, prioritizing dignity over power.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty potent question to think about.
Given these two starkly different ways of responding, when the world was never meant for us, one seizing the state, the other building community from the ground up, what does this tell us about that enduring search for belonging, for dignity, for a world actually worth surviving in?
And maybe more personally, how do you choose to respond to the systems around you that feel wrong or unsupportive? What kind of rupture or refusal or creation might you be drawn to in your own life?
There's a lot to mull over there. We really encourage you to keep exploring these complex ideas. Think about the impact of grand ideologies, but also the profound power of those intimate acts of community. They both shape history, and they shape our lives.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.